All right, joining me once again here on the Matthew Filipowicz Show is my friend Kate Sheppard. Kate is a senior reporter and the environment and energy editor at Huffington Post, which you can find at huffingtonpost.com. You can also follow her on Twitter at Kate_Sheppard. Kate, thank you so much for being on the show again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, so Kate, last week, the National Academy of Sciences released a frankly frightening report on climate change. Tell us, what did the report find and what do we need to be prepared for?
So this report was looking at what they call abrupt climate shifts. So in general, climate change is something that we think of as being pretty slow moving. Temperatures rise gradually, sea levels rise gradually, that we sort of know what's happening in the future because it's sort of a slow long-term projection. But this report was looking at abrupt shifts, so things that could change very quickly. So one of the ones that they look at as being a potential for really being problematic is rapid ice melt in the Arctic, which would dramatically raise sea levels much faster than current projections have said that it would probably look like. Another one is looking at how, and the other part of the report is looking at how relatively gradual shifts can have immediate abrupt changes for humanity. So even though sea levels rise rather slowly, you could have a big storm event that causes really significant flooding, and so that's a pretty abrupt change, and that could do really abrupt damage to human infrastructure. So the report was looking at how much of a concern those abrupt shifts are. And it was pretty frightening. And the gist of the report is calling for a better monitoring system so that we actually are doing a better job of keeping track of those shifts, and so we can see what's going on in the climate system.
Yeah, I mean, it really, when you look at it, it's like, I think a lot of people, when you talk about the environment, a lot of it, it's like, oh, it's coming later. And, I mean, even though some of the stuff is frankly happening now, when you look at some of the superstorms and stuff like that, and species that are dying off. But the really scary aspect of this is how ill-prepared we are for the things that literally could happen in the blink of an eye.
Right, exactly. I mean, one of the ones you mentioned is species extinction, right? I mean, you could have a species one day, and then the next day they just hit a tipping point, and the habitat in which they currently live becomes totally inhospitable. Whether they migrate or figure out a way to adapt. I mean, it's pretty difficult to adapt to really quick shifts, and we're seeing changes that are happening much faster than anything that species alive on Earth today have ever seen before.
Mm-hmm. What's been the reaction to this report? Is it again, it seems like we have different reports coming out all the time about the desperate need for action when it comes to the climate. Has this had any different reaction when it's actually come out?
Well, one thing about this report is that it's a National Academy of Sciences report, and NAS reports are generally not original new research. They're a review of all the research that's out there, and so they tend to be seen as more comprehensive and broad reaching. And NAS is seen as sort of the scientific authority here in the U.S. So I think it's getting a lot of attention for those reasons as well. One thing I wanted to add is that there actually are two pieces in the report that are relatively good news in the grand scheme of things. One is that they don't think that there will be an abrupt release of methane in the U.S. This has been something that scientists have talked about as a potential concern for a long time, that with rapid melt of the Arctic or thawing of permafrost, that we would have huge releases of methane that would then rapidly increase our emissions overall and have much quicker feedback than we've seen normally. I think that's not going to happen. I think it's going to be much more of a slow release. So it's still a problem, but it's not going to be as quickly a problem as some people have been concerned about. Another one is they don't think that there is going to be a massive shift in the Arctic jet stream, the Atlantic jet stream in the near future. That'd been another thing that's been put out there as sort of a worst case scenario threat, and so that they don't think that's going to happen anytime in the near future. So that's good news. But overall, the report's pretty bad news. But I gotta find the things to be pleased about in there.
Right. So what is actually? I mean, you mentioned that the report talks about how ill prepared we are for these things. What I mean, and I know recently a lot has been that not a lot, because again, not that many people cover the climate very much. This is something that still doesn't get nearly the amount of coverage it needs. But how much like actual monitoring programs have been affected by something like the sequester? How budget cuts have actually really gutted science quite a good deal. deal? What is actually needed to prepare us for these sudden giant shifts that could happen in the blink of an eye?
So the report calls for better monitoring systems, and as you mentioned, due to budget cuts and the sequester, and we've actually been cutting back on some of our monitoring programs, like satellites, for example, at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, for one. So, one of the things they call for is increased funding for things like satellites, for things like devices that would track emissions, particularly in the Arctic, so we could see how much methane is being emitted, for example. So they're calling for more funding for those kind of programs here in the U.S. And the idea is that having a sort of closer watch on those would let us have more awareness if there is some shift underway that we're not noticing right now.